There becomes a moment in every soul's journey when the life you've built no longer fits the person you're becoming. A moment where your intuition grows louder than your fear. When the signs become impossible to ignore. When the masks begin to fall away and you realize you were never lost, you were remembering. Welcome to the Heyoka Shaman Podcast, a space for seekers, healers, empaths, mystics, survivors, and old souls navigating the path of awakening. Together, we'll explore spirituality, intuition, shadow work, healing, consciousness, energy, transformation, and what it truly means to walk between worlds. We'll have conversations about the right things that most people are afraid to talk about: the dark nights, the spiritual awakenings, the grief, the healing, the gifts, the lessons, and the profound journey of coming home to yourself. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the conditioning, the wounds, the expectations, and the fear. If you've ever felt different, if you've ever questioned reality, if you've ever known there was more waiting for you beyond the life you've been told to live, this podcast is for you. The awakening has already begun. The question is, are you ready to answer the call? I'm your host of the podcast, Haylz, founder of the Heyoka Shaman, YouTuber for the last 7 years, author, and medium. This is the Heyoka Shaman Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Okay, we're on record for episode 6 of the podcast. This one's about the ego and the soul and the inner battle of awakening. There's a lot we can talk about on this topic. Egos. Everyone out there has egos. Aren't you sick of dealing with major egos? So this episode will give you a little bit of insight on, that little struggle that we face, and when someone's too much in their ego, the problems that they face. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the Heyoka Shaman Podcast. I'm your host, Haylz, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this time with me today. Over the past 5 episodes, we've been walking a journey together. We stepped out of the spiritual closet. We answered the awakening call. We survived the dark night of the soul. And we discovered that our triggers can become powerful teachers. And in our last episode, we explored learning to trust our intuition. But if you've noticed something, the journey doesn't suddenly become easy once you begin awakening. In many ways, that's when the real work begins, because as soon as you start trusting yourself, another voice often appears. It whispers, "You're not ready. What if you fail? Who do you think you are? Stay where it's safe." Today we're talking about those two voices, the voice of the ego and the voice of the soul. Not because one is good and the other is bad, but because learning to recognize them can completely change the way you navigate your life. Let's begin. Let's talk about the misunderstood ego. The word ego often gets a bad reputation in spiritual conversations. People talk about killing the ego or getting rid of the ego. But I don't think that's the goal. The ego isn't your worst enemy. The ego developed to help you to survive. It's the part of your mind that seeks safety, certainty, and predictability. It remembers our painful experiences. It notices potential threats. It wants to protect you from being hurt again. In many ways, the ego has been working incredibly hard on your behalf. The problem isn't that the ego exists. The problem comes when the ego begins running every part of your life. When fear makes every decision. When comfort becomes more important than growth. When avoiding pain becomes more important than living authentically. Now, I want to talk about the language of the soul, because the soul speaks differently. It doesn't usually shout, it doesn't pressure, it doesn't manipulate, it invites. The soul is less interested in keeping you comfortable and more interested in helping you fully become yourself. Sometimes that means asking you to have difficult conversations. Sometimes it means asking you to leave environments that no longer align with your values. Sometimes it means encouraging you to forgive, even when forgiveness feels impossible. The soul doesn't promise an easy path, but it continually points towards a meaningful one. I want to talk about why awakening feels like an inner battle. Have you ever made a decision that felt deeply right and then immediately questioned yourself? Maybe you decided to leave a job, end a relationship, start a business, move to a new city, or simply set a healthy boundary. At first, there was peace, but then doubt arrived. That experience is incredibly common. Growth often activates fear because change is unfamiliar. Your ego may interpret unfamiliarity as danger. Meanwhile, another part of you senses that staying the same is no longer an option. This is why awakening can feel like an inner tug of war. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because different parts of you have different priorities. I want to talk about fear, and fear not always being the enemy. Here's something that changed my perspective. Fear isn't always trying to stop you. Sometimes it's trying to protect you based on what's learned. If you've experienced rejection before, fear may encourage you not to speak up. If you've experienced heartbreak, fear may encourage you not to open your heart again. If you've failed at something in the past, fear may tell you not to try. Fear often carries old information. It doesn't always reflect your present reality. Instead of fighting fear, try becoming curious about it. Ask yourself, what is this fear trying to protect me from? What is it trying to protect? Does that protection still serve me today? Sometimes you'll discover that fear has simply outlived its purpose. Let's talk about the comfort zone. One of the greatest illusions is believing that staying comfortable always keeps us safe. Comfort can become a prison. Many people stay in careers that no longer fulfill them, relationships that no longer nourish them, patterns that no longer support them, not because they enjoy them, but because they're familiar. The ego says, at least we know what to expect here. The soul whispers, there is more waiting for you. Growth rarely begins inside the comfort zone, but neither does it require reckless decisions. It asks for thoughtful courage. Sorry, that choice of wording just made me laugh. Reckless decisions. One honest conversation, one new boundary, and one small act of authenticity. Those small choices eventually become a different life. I want to talk about the need for control because the ego loves certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants to know exactly how everything will unfold. But life rarely works that way. If you've ever waited until you felt completely ready, you probably know that moment never fully arrives. Growth asks us to take the next step before we see the entire path. And that's where trust comes in. Not blind optimism, not pretending life will always be easy, but trusting that you can meet whatever comes next with wisdom, resilience, and compassion. Sometimes the greatest freedom comes from letting go of the need to control every outcome. I want to talk about living from an alignment and what alignment means. It's a very important alignment. I meditate to always be in alignment. So it's a very interesting place to be sitting, and it's where we all need to aim to be sitting. Not in our fear, not in our ego, but in alignment with what it is we want to create and manifest in our world. So alignment is a word we hear often, but what does it actually mean? To me, alignment means living in a way that reflects your deepest values. It means making choices that allow you to respect yourself. It means recognizing when something no longer fits. It doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means your outer life gradually begins reflecting your inner truth. And I'm sure you've heard all of this before. Your outer world is a reflection of your inner worlds, your inner thoughts, your inner being. So if we are living in a world of chaos, that means our internal world is chaotic, and we want to be in alignment with what we want to manifest, what we want to create. So our outer world needs to reflect our internal condition, which is alignment. If we are living a life, that we are happy with, aligned with our goals, our passions, our dreams. But when you live from alignment, there may still be fear. But fear is no longer driving the car. It's simply sitting in the passenger seat. When the ego and the soul work together is the next kind of topic I'd like to discuss. And I'd like to say perhaps the goal isn't choosing the ego or the soul. Perhaps it's allowing them to co-create, work together, and collaborate. The ego offers awareness of potential risks. The soul offers vision. The ego encourages preparation. The soul encourages possibility. When they're balanced, we can move forward thoughtfully rather than impulsively. We honor our intuition while remaining grounded. We pursue growth without abandoning wisdom. That's a much more sustainable way to live. I want to talk about choosing your future self now. Every decision you make is, in some way, a conversation with your future self. Will today's choice move you closer to the person you're becoming, or keep you connected to the person you've already outgrown? That doesn't mean every decision needs to be dramatic. Often, transformation happens through ordinary moments, choosing honesty, choosing rest, choosing forgiveness, choosing boundaries, choosing courage. These small decisions shape extraordinary lives. So I guess you kind of need to think about your thoughts, and are they in alignment with your current 3D reality? Is this the person I want to be in my future? Is this the life I want to create in my future? Am I pushing people away because of fear, or am I choosing growth? So as we finish today's conversation, I'd like to leave you with this thought. The ego will probably never disappear completely, and that's okay. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to silence it. You simply need to recognize when fear is speaking, and gently ask whether your deeper wisdom has something different to say. Because your soul isn't trying to make you someone else. It's inviting you to become more fully yourself. And every time you choose authenticity over fear, compassion over judgment, growth over comfort, you take another step towards a life that truly reflects who you are. So this episode is really about living authenticity, being authentic, living in authenticity, and, not choosing to live from your ego in every decision that you make, and ensuring that your ego isn't overpowering, your true authentic self, which comes from the soul. So thank you for joining me for episode 6 of the Heyoka Shaman Podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who may be navigating their own awakening journey. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please follow the show and comment and leave it a review. It helps these conversations reach others who are searching for healing, meaning, and connection. Until next time, protect your energy, heal what calls for your attention, align with your truth, and remember, the ego remembers where you have been, the soul remembers who you are. Listen carefully. One speaks from fear, the other speaks from love. I'm Haylz, and I'll meet you between the worlds. Thanks for joining me today.